Getting Older. I'm Nick. This week we did not record an intro, so we're just going to go ahead and jump right into part two of our Dungeons and Dragons episode. This one's a bit of a long one, so sit back, relax, grab some snacks, and enjoy.
So I don't know much about the history of D&D. Blake, that was something that you were pretty familiar with, right? Like I said, I didn't play D&D, and it wasn't until I was 29, 30 years old. I'd obviously heard of D&D. I'd seen it in card shops and stuff, but I don't know much of where it originated from or anything like that. I know it was one thing that you had done a lot of reading on and kind of wanted to talk about today. So what is the history of D&D and where did it begin and how has it become kind of what it is today?
Yeah, so uh I don't know. I To kind of preface, I only know about the history of D&D because when I
Preface that bad
really
boy.
what?
Preface that.
Yeah. Whenever I really get into something, I tend to obsess over it and try to learn everything I can about it. And I think Gary Gygax is just so synonymous with D&D. You can't help but wonder, well, who was he? People know him as the creator of D&D, but they don't really know the history of D&D. So it's got a unique founding. So D&D officially released in 1974, but there were some things that led up to it, such as Gary Gygax, along with a friend, created a game that was a 14-page. Oh no, sorry, that was the supplement. The game was called Chainmail. I don't know how many pages that was, but Chainmail was literally just medieval combat. It was a simulation of medieval combat in a tabletop setting. He came out with a 14-page supplement describing the application of those medieval combat rules with fantasy as well. So that's where we get, Fireball from. He included monsters in that, stuff like that. So I would say Chainmail is probably the father of D&D, and then we've got the mother of D&D, who was created by someone we don't really know as synonymously with I'm gonna say D&D a lot, with Gary Gygax. This gentleman's name was Dave Arneson, and he actually had played Chainmail and he was a big fan of it, but he was also a big fan of other games, and he decided to make his own game called Blackmore. And the universe was more Lord of the Rings style, and this focused more on the dungeon side of fantasy as well as puzzles. And then this actually focused on you playing one character, and then you would take that character across multiple stories, progressing from one session to this next. So you can kind of see that Chainmail was half of D&D, Blackmore was the other half. And then in 1972, Arneson actually got to meet Gary Gygax and played Blackmore for him, and apparently just fell in love with Blackmore. And he actually wanted to work with Arneson on making their own combined game together. So Arneson sent him 18 handwritten pages of Blackmore. Gary Gygax extended it to 50, and then they got together and then play tested with his children and called the campaign Castle Greyhawk. If you're not familiar with Greyhawk is a pretty established thing in Dungeons and Dragons, so you can see where it came from. It came from playtesting with his own children, this combination of two games into one. So that's how that got started. Gygax and Arneson were trying to find someone to publish the book for them, and no one wanted to publish it. So in 1973, they founded Tactical Studies Rule and self-published.
I can imagine it would be pretty difficult to publish something kind of so fantasy and so kind of out there back then in the 70s.
Especially something that would be a not even necessarily like a book in the sense of like you're reading this as like, oh yeah, I'm reading about this. The idea that you're like it's a book that's kind of a guide to like a game, but then there's no pieces to the game, right? Like I could understand as an editing company, like what the heck am I supposed to do with this? Like who is gonna buy this manual basically?
Yeah,
Like
and
Right.
also the content, I mean, dragons and magic and fantasy. I mean, back then that wasn't what you were looking for. I mean, I think the biggest sci-fi they liked back then was aliens and robots and stuff like that.
Futuristic. I will say there were a lot of nerds back then too. I learned this is just a little side note that I learned. Back then, nerds of that type had little gaming groups they'd put together, And so if you think of it, they were like acting troops or biker gangs. So today's would be the Vox Machina, which is Critical Role. So that was just so commonplace. That's actually how they got in touch, just through all these gaming groups that interacted with other gaming groups. I just thought that was an interesting little tidbit.
So are they still the ones responsible for like writing books today? Like I know that D&D has evolved over the years. Are they still producing their own content, or do they have like a team of people, or where has D&D gone since then?
So Gygax actually died in early 2000s. He died at the age of 69, I believe. And I don't know where Arneson is. D&D's got a wild dramatic history, man. So, I told you they published the book in 1974. I mentioned this earlier. Do you know how much those books cost? I don't know if it was
Tell
each
us.
individual book or all three, but it was $10. And at the time, that was considered an outrageous amount of money, and people just plagiarized it or pirated copies.
I wish it was
Wow.
$10 right now.
Right. Like nowadays you're paying $50, $60 a book. That's just crazy. And then, they did more back then too. So I guess with the 3 booklets you got, they shipped you a wood grain colored cardboard box. So when you opened it, there's the 3 books. And it actually did well back then. In their first month alone, they sold 150 copies.
Nice.
And then 11 months later, they had already ordered 1,000 copies. And then by the next year, they had sold 2,000 copies before the year was up.
Nice.
Like, so there was a market for it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things happened from there. They started making additional books and stuff. I think, let's see. So that was the basic original Dungeons and Dragon. They came out with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which is like D&D's second edition in 78,
Yes. Yeah.
79. That's when they started coming out with books like the Monsters Manual. They started doing box sets, stuff like that. And then a little bit of drama hits around the 80s, 85. A lot of shit happened in the 80s and 85 that almost killed D&D. Mainly because the company TSR they started, it had grown into this multi-million dollar company. They even had a branch in the United Kingdom so they can reach the England audience. But greed kind of set in. So I don't know if it was like board members or other executives. They pushed Gygax out. So Gygax in the 80s gets pushed out of TSR. From what I understand, up until like the early 2000s when Wizards of the Coast buys TSR, they were just suing him, trying to prevent him from making more games because this dude had a brain and an imagination, and he was really good at it. But yeah, in the 80s, you will also have Satanic Panic starting to set in, and that's actually when D&D started getting in more pop culture like movies. 1982 we had a scene in ET featuring D&D. But I don't know if any of you know of this movie. Have you ever heard of 1982's Mazes and Monsters?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Do you know who's in it?
David Bowie,
No, it's before he gets famous from doing Groundhog Day or
Bill Murray.
Oh no, not Groundhog Day. I'm sorry.
You're getting me
Forrest Gump.
excited.
Forrest Gump.
Tom Hanks.
Yeah,
You had
Tom
me-
Hanks.
You had me excited thinking Bill Murray.
No,
I
It
love
was
Tom Hanks. Hold on. Hold on. Can we guys, this is the GGO Tom Hanks appreciation moment. I love Tom Hanks and everything he does. I cry every time I watch Forrest Gump. You've got mail, chef's kiss. Anyway,
can we also just take a moment? So Satanic Panic got a grip on D&D because there was a college boy that was playing D&D with his friends. He did it regularly like we do, right? He gets together with his friends, plays D&D. Unfortunately, he was battling issues with depression and stuff like that. He disappeared for a while, and his parents were calling the cops and everything, and unfortunately killed himself. They blamed it on D&D. And then because of the contents of D&D where you have demons and everything in that, they were just like, "Oh, this is the Satan's game." And Mazes and Monsters is based on that story. So it's Tom Hanks slowly losing his mind from playing D&D, becoming so engrossed in his character he thinks he is his character. Unfortunately, Tom Hanks' character had a better ending. He went through, I think, therapy at the end of the movie. I just read the movie because I was like, this seems mad messed up, even for that time period. But I guess it makes sense. It was essentially a propaganda movie they were pushing to not include D&D.
Yeah, because D&D used to be taboo back then.
Yeah. And I guess it's still got a little bit of it.
It's more mainstream accepted now because of shows like Nick said,
Oh,
Stranger
Stranger
Things and
Things.
stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
And
and a lot of it is a critical role too. I mean, their persistence and dedication to it and making it so good,
Yep.
really brought in a huge audience. With that being said, don't at me with your favorite critical role moments. I don't care.
Adam. No, but also Wizards of the Coast did a lot in the beginning when they first acquired TSR to bring a more diverse audience into it. So after Gary Gygax got pushed out in 85, I think I said, yeah, 85, they did a lot more successful. So they came out with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition, and I think they came out with more campaigns and stuff, right? They came out with video games, stuff like that, but they were making questionable business decisions. I guess one of the things that they did was they signed a contract with the printing press they went through that they would only print books through them because they were having money issues with them at the time. So this is as a way of them going, yeah, this will settle it. And the printing press just kept raising the prices on them and demanding more money. And then when they started trying to release video games and stuff like that, the printing press just stopped printing for them because TSR wasn't paying them. Actually, speaking of that, Nick, were doing you were talking to us about one of the first GUI RPGs, right? That was a
Uh,
long time ago.
a while
Uh,
ago,
yeah. So don't know if you
Neverwinter
knew
Nights.
this. Yeah, that was made with TSR.
Yes.
So I
Neverwinter
thought that
Nights,
was pretty
by the
cool.
way, if you're not familiar, was one. I believe it was the first fully 3D GUI based MMORPG.
Yep. And TSR took part in doing that along with AOL Network, which is just mind-boggling. But
They had a
after
hand in our most favorite pastime.
right.
I will cherish those coasters I received in the mail till the day I die.
I just want you to know every time you play like WoW or Final Fantasy 14, you can kind of go back to the roots and know, oh, something to do with D&D is in here too. It's not just because they were like it was someone saying let's copy D&D and put it in this game. It's because they were putting D&D into a game.
That's one of the things I was inferring from the beginning when I said that D&D permeates throughout the gaming genre is all of the stats, all of your Morrowinds, your Elder Scrolls,
Mhm.
all of these games that use character stats and rolls for attacks and stuff. That's all D&D inspired.
Oh
And
yeah.
if you want to play D&D as a game, Baldur's Gate 3 hands down is one of the absolute best digital D&D experiences you could possibly have, next to Divinity.
And then if you want to read D&D without reading the manuals or any of the supplements, I think the book's called it's not Neverwinter. Dragonlance. There's a novel called the Dragonlance novels is also printed by TSR back in 1984 or something. So they've got their hooks they had their hooks into everything. But, because of TSR's questionable business practices, they found themselves on the verge of bankruptcy, even though business was doing well. And so,
What were these questionable business practices? Do we know, or was it released?
yes, so one of the things was the printing press. I don't know how the whole business of it works. They made the deal with the printing press that they would only go through them as a way of trying to settle debts. And then because the printing press had a written agreement on this, they were just like, we'll go ahead and keep marking this up. And then I guess the distributor that they went to paid them for the product before it was even sold in bookstores. So TSR got paid, but the distributor wouldn't get paid until it was bought in the bookstore. So they could push through 1,000 copies. TSR would get paid for those 1,000 copies up front. And as long as business was well, and then the distributor sold those 1,000 copies, everyone made money. But the distributor could return those books at any time if business wasn't doing well. So it was just bad money management where they were going, oh well, we sold, let's say, 3,000 copies. We're going to they wanted to get into the realm of digital gaming. So they were putting all that money into making like digital disc for manuals, making games out of it before the money was even in their pocket. So then the distributor was like, I need to get a refund on these books. And TSR was like, well, we can't pay you because we don't have that money.
Mhm.
So just people being greedy, not actually thinking about the future. They were just like, money now. So it all led up to 1997, where they were on the verge of shutting their doors, and Wizards of the Coast, who makes Magic the Gathering, which you're all also a fan of, I believe, came in and purchased them for like $235 million or something like that, which isn't a lot of money nowadays.
Yeah.
That's still insane to sell for that much for a company that's potentially in the red and has outstanding contracts that could be causing them a lot of hindrance. Like that's still a hefty amount. That's a pretty big payday for.
Do I need to talk about Microsoft's acquirement of Activision Blizzard?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's a difference in money standards from then to now, but if you were to do a conversion, that's still a lot of money.
I think it was one of those things Wizards of the Coast saw, oh my God, this is a great product. Why aren't they doing more with it? Oh, this is why we'll just purchase you and we'll lead you into the, what is it, the red? Or is the green? Lead you into the green. We'll make that money together. And black, that's it. Yeah.
Or black. I think most ledgers is black and red.
We'll lead you into the black. And I don't know about, so since then, I don't remember what year Wizards of the Coast has been purchased by Hasbro, but 1997 Wizards of the Coast, I 100% wanted to work for. When they made the purchase of TSR, they not only kept every employee that they could on, they regularly flew them to New York to help them find living arrangements, helped them with rent. And I think an employee went on record and said that they did everything but carry us into the new home. They paid for their meals. Yeah, right. And then
1997, youngin, weren't you still not even born yet?
no, I was born in 93. Nice try. I was the
So,
ripe age of
for
4.
the people that have never played D&D or don't really know much about it, you said it came out, the original edition came out in 74. How many different editions have there been since then till now for the people?
We're just gonna say outright 5 because there's basic D&D, advanced Dungeons and Dragon,
Mhm.
then there's, which is second edition, there's D&D 3, D&D 3.5, D&D 4th edition, which is widely regarded as the worst one to ever come out, I believe, and then D&D 5th. But especially when Gygax was pushed out, they tried to revamp Basic Edition, which could probably be considered a 1.5. And then there was revisions to Second Edition. They even did things where I think it was Second Edition you couldn't use First Edition with. So they tried to go back and redo that, I think. So there's just too many changes to it to get a firm grip on. But I would just say go by the editions that they have. If there's a 5th edition, then there's a 1 through 4 as well. I think the only difference I would want to make is between 3 and 3.5. And I know they did a lot. And I started with 3.5 actually. My first campaign, now that my memory is actually kicking into gear, is not with Nick's playing of the Lost Mines of Phandelver. It was a custom campaign in 3.5 with my fiance's brother-in-law because he's been playing since. Well, I think he's been playing since 3.5 came out. He could never get his hands on any of the earlier books. So yeah, he's been playing since 3.5, and he's the person I go to if I want lore about Drow or something because he just knows it all. And I have to spout out this fun little fact. In Drow, it's a matriarchal society. So the women are the warriors and leaders, and men are typically just sex slaves.
Learn that when you read the Drizzt books. Or the Drizzt, however you say it, Nick. Just want to, don't want to say it wrong.
I pronounce it Drizzt T just because I think it sounds cool. Because I think Ice-T voiced some of the voices in one of the books.
Okay. But back to Wizards of the Coast acquiring. So I already said that they did everything but carry them through the doorway. Wizards of the Coast, 1997, right? Let's just put that out there. 1997. We didn't have what we have now where companies would be LGBTQ plus friendly or shit. Maybe even back then they weren't even as racially friendly as they are today. Wizards of the Coast specifically said They wanted a diverse work environment where you would work side by side, and this is a quote. They wanted everyone working side by side with goths, Satanists, gays, lesbians, transgender, and more. This is the CEO. His name was Peter Adkinson, telling his employees this, 1997. Also, another little fact about Peter Adkinson, he would sit out amongst everyone else instead of being in his own office. So the people that came from TSR were like, it was just so interesting where the CEO was treating you as a human being and not just looking down on you. That, like, can you imagine going from that toxic of a workplace to Wizards that was just like, yeah, we love everyone and we want everyone here. We want everyone to buy our stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great transition. I'm sure there was a lot of shell shock.
Oh yeah. I mean, not everyone stayed, right? So some people left, went to start their own company. I don't remember what that one was called, but they ended up making their own games and stuff like that.
Bunch of weirdos.
Also, so I mentioned in 85 Gygax was pushed out, right? And then between 85 and their acquirement by Wizards of the Coast, they were just suing the hell out of Gygax. Gygax was trying to make some video games, trying to make his own new board games, because at this point, when Wizards acquired TSR, Gygax believed that RPG games got too difficult, and he was trying to make his own game that was more basic. It wasn't so over inundated with mechanics. It was just basic. You go in, you do the thing, you're done. So I thought that was interesting. But when Peter Adkins took over, he wanted to actually do good by Gary Gygax, and I guess just started writing the dude's checks. Dropped all the lawsuits, started writing checks to him and the family, and it was a way to solidify, like, hey, we're different now. This is what we're gonna do. But it was also as a thing of saying, hey, this is a way to right the wrongs, and we're going to be the sole owners of this. What is that called? I don't intellectual property. There it is. We're the sole owners of this IP now, so we're going to pay you for it, essentially. Not just pay him off, but they also brought him back to help build some of the things. And I think in like 2005 or something, he came in and helped them make. He became like a huge face for Wizards of the Coast, specifically D&D, because everyone knew Gygax as the creator. And actually, a lot of people were mad that he got forced out of the company, saying they did him and Arneson wrong, which I would agree with. So he became the face of Wizards of the Coast D&D until his death. And I think he revamped the Tomb of Horrors. He brought that back for them. He wrote some additional games, and he made an appearance in Futurama. Forgot about that. Where he played
The G-Man himself did?
Yeah.
Hot diggity.
I have in my notes he appeared in several television shows, one being Futurama and Code Monkeys, and participating in discussions on role-playing related message boards.
Can we all just pause for a moment and get some appreciation going for Futurama and how great of a show that was?
I love Futurama.
Does everybody here love Futurama, or do we need to kick somebody off this call?
I don't think you need to kick anyone off.
I don't know. I haven't heard an answer from Steven yet, and he's got a grin on his face.
What I've watched, I've enjoyed.
That's an acceptable answer.
I do love Futurama, though I haven't watched a lot of it, if I'm being honest. But any of the episodes I have ever watched, I've always enjoyed. Like, I've always loved Bender's character. And there's actually a local brewery here called Wooden Robot, and they've almost modeled their little wooden robot statue to look like Bender, except his body is a keg.
I remember you sending me that. That was pretty sweet.
But the rest of it looks like Bender. I'm like, there were some Futurama fans here when they made this brewery and gave it this name and then modeled it kind of after the Bender look. But it's something that I would love to watch more of. I always it's one of those shows I kind of forget about. Sadly, it's kind of like Rick and Morty. I like Rick and Morty, but I haven't seen all of the episodes of that either.
I just started watching season 5 on Hulu. Hulu's a little bit behind from the rest of the party. Rick and Morty was another one of those things. I was like, I'm never going to get into that because the people that watch it are cringy. And then I started watching it and I was like, oh, this is actually funny. I just need to ignore those people.
Yeah, the Pickle Rick stuff made the show kind of weird for a little bit, but I loved it before that. I mean, Rick and Morty is a great show. You know what a hidden gem is on Adult Swim? It's like, this is kind of a tangent, and we apologize. But have you guys ever seen a show called Joe Pera Talks with You?
Nope. I've heard of it.
It's a wonderful, awesome TV show. It is super calm and quaint. It's heartfelt, but it's very funny. Joe Pera is a character that I love doing impressions of people. I can't figure out how to do an impression of his character. When you
Can
see
you
him, you'll know why.
can you tell me what the show's about?
So Joe Pera plays himself, Joe Pera, as a version of himself that lives in a town in Michigan, and he lives right next to Lake Superior, and he's a choir teacher at school.
I'm gonna have
It,
to stop you right there. The answer I was looking for was Joe Pera talks to people.
well, he does, but there's each episode has a theme. Like there's one episode where Joe Pera takes you on a fall loop, which and that's actually one of my favorite episodes because he learns in the episode that every time you carve a jack-o'-lantern, you give it 1/16 of your soul. And in order to get your soul back, you have to do something calm and nice like bake cookies or go on a fall drive. So every year he carves a pumpkin, makes a jack-o'-lantern, and he gives it 1/16 of its soul. And to regrow his soul, he goes on a fall drive every year and on the same roads, all the way to a river where he gives a burial like send off to his jack-o'-lantern into the river and you watch it floats down. That's kind of the whole episode, but it's so funny. The whole thing is so ridiculous, but he makes it seem like almost normal, and everything else is just so funny in between. It's really great. Like there's one part where he's driving down the road and he sees the jack-o'-lantern in the rearview mirror, and he's like, I can't help but wonder if that jack-o'-lantern sitting in the back seat looking at me through this mirror, wondering why.
All right. Well, does he play D&D in that?
Nope, totally off topic. 100%
Unfortunate.
off topic, baby.
um.
Adult Swim's pretty D&D though.
Yeah, that's true.
Totally rad.
But I just looked it up while Nick was giving us all the information about Joe Pera. So between 1974 and 1999, 2000, whenever Wizards of the Coast acquired, do you know how many versions TSR came out with of D&D?
How many?
2. Basic Dungeons and Dragons and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and we'll just say all the revisions in between. It wasn't until the acquirement they came out with 3rd edition in 2000, and then a couple of years after it came out, 2003 came out with 3.5, and then in 2007 came out with 4th edition, and
8.
now in 2007, 2014. Oh, sorry, you're right. Son of a bitch. 2007, it was announced at Gen Con. 2008, it was officially released. Here I am doing that again. 2014, though, I double checked this. 5th edition is
Yes.
released. 2014. So in 14 years, they went through 5 editions.
Mhm.
Now,
Well,
I will say, so obviously from a publisher standpoint, it's good to make new products for people to buy because eventually everybody that's going to buy your product is going to buy your product and it's going to go stale. So you have to
Mhm.
give them new things. But I will say that they've refined it to a very nice point because
yeah.
I've seen combat in previous editions. It does not seem as fun or as smooth as it is currently in its current state.
Well, you know how we were talking about earlier, where trying to find a balance between roleplay and combat as a DM and as a player is one of those perfect mediums you want to achieve. It's the same thing I think Wizards of the Coast was trying to do. So I've played 3.5, which is very math heavy, and then I didn't play any of 4th edition. I think they made everyone way too overpowered, and I think it might have been too roleplay heavy. And then you're getting kind of mixed opinions on 5th edition, but I think it's a comfortable point for them. It simplified combat enough where you're not thinking too hard and gives you more time to RP should you choose, but also it's still giving you that whole combat. It can be dangerous and it's fun.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the other editions. I've only ever played 5th edition. So, but for me, what I've played has definitely been fun. I've played some other. What was it? Starfinder? Is that actually part of D&D, or is that separate?
So
That's a separate thing.
I would say Starfinder wouldn't exist if D&D didn't exist, but it's its own unique system.
we'll just put it out there that D&D is the reason most tabletop RPGs exist today in the form that they do.
Yeah, and when I played Starfinder, like I enjoyed it, but ultimately when I then played my first D&D campaign, I enjoyed D&D more.
Yeah.
So but I understand that if like D&D is the father and these are all, the kind of spin-offs and stuff, they have to make variations and changes to avoid copyrights and things of that nature. So
Oh,
it
yeah.
does make sense that like ultimately your best experience is to go to the source and play a version of true D&D, to get kind of that real experience that they were going for, because these other kind of spin-offs are going to have to make changes, and maybe in ways that they felt was necessary based on their own D&D experiences, right? Which is why they potentially made these. But I think for me, ultimately, D&D's provided me with the best experience out of all those tabletops.
Yeah,
And
it's.
I think, sorry, Nick.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think a lot of the people that go and make their own spin-offs is because there's a lot of opinions out there that D&D has just gotten overly complicated. There's a lot of mechanics in D&D that you don't necessarily have to explore, but you were mentioning earlier that you enjoyed a high-level mage. High-level mages are fun, but if you really want to get into the mechanics of it, then you have to pay attention to what spell components you have or what spells require components versus not. Nick was mentioning we did that Curse of Strahd campaign. It was my first time playing a wizard, and I was playing with a DM. We didn't discuss this in session 0, where we go through expectations and whatnot, but he made me have all the components. So by the time I was able to cast Fireball, which is a meme in D&D culture of its own right, I couldn't cast it because I never had the components, which I think was like bat guano and something else. I was like, well, it kind of took the fun out of playing a mage because I didn't, or a wizard because I didn't have any of the mechanics down and I didn't know this.
Yeah, and I think that's a good argument for a dungeon master to have with another dungeon master. Whereas, do you want the game to be rules heavy, where regardless of how the players feel, we're following these rules. These rules will be followed, and if you don't like it, there's the door. Or
Mm-hmm.
or you don't follow some of the smaller rules. Like, I mean, there's a lot of little rules that we've never followed, like spell components.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things with time that we don't really worry about too much. Weather effects, stuff like that. I mean, Brendan, your character wore heavy plate mail through the jungle. There was a specific rule in the book that was I was supposed to give you negative things about plate mail in the jungle, but it's like, who cares? Like, why penalize somebody for wearing the armor his class is supposed to wear?
Yeah.
Well, it's supposed to give its own separate challenges and give you a thing to play. I
Yeah.
enjoy mechanic heavy games, but I also understand that it needs to be fun for the players and it needs to be fun for you. So,
Yeah. Do you want it to be fun for yourself? Like, do you, as a DM, want to like tap your fingertips together behind the screen and enjoy watching everybody follow all of your rules and do everything that you specifically wanted, or do you want to sit back and be more relaxed and make sure that the players are having fun? Not that what you want to have happen or want to do is happening, but like you have to give it all up, and if what you're doing isn't fun, like let the players kind of take over more, loosen up a bit, let them have fun. Because at the end of the day, it's not about you and what you want to do in the game. It's about making sure the people playing the game with you, all the people that dedicated all this time and said, I'm going to trust you with this 4 hours, make sure they're having fun. So maybe abandon some ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I kind of feel like, what going back to your full plate armor in the jungle, and I remember you saying that you weren't going to be real a stickler for all that kind of stuff. And so that's why, like, in my head, I was like, I'll take this oil with me and put it on my armor and kind of keep it, moving. And so it's mobile and everything. So it didn't, start to rust. And that was like my own little like RP for it, like reasoning why it wasn't going down or, becoming bad.
Yeah, and also like attuning magic items. There's a limit to how many magic items you can attune to. Not in the game we played, because you were attuned to several magic items, but to shift things back, we had an in story reason for that, so that in our next campaign, just to make it a little more difficult because everybody is so strong, we've found a way, like in the story of the lore of the game we're playing, to insert that rule back in and have it kind of make sense.
Wasn't that also because of a lack of awareness of the rule?
100%. That's the reason. But
All
we
right,
can
Steven.
tell the tale however we want.
But I'll say to Blake's point when he's talking about playing with a DM who was saying you had to have all the components to cast spells and those things, which I totally understand and respect if that's the level you want to play. But then at the same point, like you're supposed to be DMing to bring fun to your friends and those things. And if the campaign isn't written in such a way that you as a wizard comes across these items, like what's the point in playing? It's like you take these spells and you never come across the bat goo that you need in order to cast this spell. Like at that point, if the DM wants to say we're going to follow all these rules and you have to have these components, like they should also then be finding ways to provide you
Preach
with
it.
those items, because then
Yes.
and ultimately provide you with those items when they at that point they can dictate when they feel necessary. So they're like, oh, we have this big battle coming up, I want to make sure Blake's character is able to cast fireball. And then if you're really concerned that's going to take away from the fight, well, you just have extra monsters on deck to beef the fight up. So then you're like, sweet, I casted fireball and you took out all these people. And then he's like, oh, by the way, reinforcements. And then you still, you're balancing the fight out, but you're allowing your character or the people that you're DMing over to be enjoy their character and be fully submerged in the experience of what their character has to offer.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was my biggest issue with the campaign. I ran across Bat Guano once. There was only one town at all that we visited once, and then we had to sneak out of for whatever reason. So because I never was aware that I would need components to cast spells, I was just casting cantrips the entire time. That almost killed me ever playing a wizard again. I think I found a pretty good balance now, and a big thing about D&D is there's this mindset people have where it's the DM versus the players. A lot of people trying to change that. I'm not saying everyone does this. It should really be a collaboration between the DM and the players. So I talked to all of them about this before I implemented this as a rule. I said anyone playing a class that gets spells, until you hit level 4, you don't have to worry about spell components. We're just going to say the spell component bounce you get every time you reach in, it's there. Once you get the access to those 5th level spells, I'm going to put towns in anywhere. I'll have a random encounter table where, you have a 2 out of 15 chance of meeting a random merchant that's going to have spell components for you. I'm going to give you the opportunities to get these spell components so that you can continue to cast these spells, but you're going to have to pay attention to the components yourself.
And that kind of would give you like a really good like role play aspect of it too, where like if you throw in the merchant, then you can, make them have to figure out how they're going to ask for these things or like go through and, it builds to the story a little bit. I like that.
Yeah. And
What are you
another
buying?
thing.
Yeah.
What are you selling? Another thing about D&D is, and this is one of the small
Blake.
Complaints. Yes.
The whole episode's about D&D. You don't have to keep saying another thing about
I'm
D&D.
sorry. It's just a habit. Anyways, one of the things about it is I lost my train of thought. Son of a
I'm
bitch.
sorry. I do that all the time. My bad.
We were talking about spell components. We were talking about making it fun, giving people opportunities. I lost it. It's gone.
I'm sorry.
I get what you're saying, because there are certain aspects of the game, even ones that we play, like we have items and we're not really worried about food or
I remember
those sorts of things. And I do think that I would like to play in a campaign where maybe some of that stuff was more implemented just to add, because I think that adds some of the role playing aspect to it. Having to make sure you have a tinder box and you're keeping your clothes dry if you're going through a certain type of environment, or more of a use for even golden gems. A lot of times I played in campaigns where I end up with like boatloads of gold but nothing to do with it.
That's what I was gonna bring up.
Yeah, because then you're not using it to buy components, or you're not using it to buy this or that. And one thing that I've always found, kind of odd, any D&D campaign I've played, you go into these merchants and rarely are they selling potions. That's like a hard thing to find. So then you feel like you're going through combat and you're always relying on like a mage to have spells, or like long rests or this. When it's like, I have all of this gold and we're medieval times and you're telling me I've not came across any sort of alchemist, like somebody who makes potions that I can spend this gold on.
That's kind of like my third edition campaign that I'm in right now, where I'm playing an alchemist, I'm playing an alchemist, and to make potions, it costs half of what the potion cost in gold. So
Oh,
if I'm
cool.
making like if I have a healing potion and I want to dilute that into a second healing potion, it costs half of what that is. So say it costs 50 gold to buy this outright. It costs 25 gold to make a new one. And so like I'll sit there over an hour and dilute it and do everything. And then boom, there's 25 gold. So when we're doing the party, funds, we have to make sure that we set some aside so that way my character can make, potions and make sure that we're, got everything we need, because yeah, we can just go buy one, but I can make two out of the one we buy. But we just have
and
to make
it's
sure we have the
cheaper.
gold. Yeah. But you can't dilute already diluted. So like you can only dilute them
Sure.
once.
Yeah. But I mean, you buy 4 potions, now you've got 8.
Yeah.
But what I was reminded of, one of my big complaints that's come about is how low level all the modules are. And that's fine, you can go off and make your own. A lot of these modules don't include a way for you to spend gold though. So you're just by the end of a 5th level 1 to 5 level campaign, you've got, let's say, 800 gold just to yourself. That seems kind of high, but it's not unreasonable. But there's so much you can do. Like, there are mechanics for having someone go find or make armor for you, imbue it with magic, imbue it with certain enchantments, and it starts adding up. It gives you something to look forward to. Because I think just for a base magic item, you're looking at 1,000 gold already.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
that is
that's the
wild.
kind of stuff that is not in the campaign, but it is there in the Dungeon Master's guide. So they're basically saying, "Hey, Dungeon Master, if you so choose, this is an option for you." I mean,
Yeah.
if the only reason that like Tomb of Annihilation wasn't very good for money because you were literally never in a town, you know.
Right.
But like if you were in like the overworld and you said, "Hey, I want to make a magic item," like all of that work is on the dungeon master to figure it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I
And
mean,
it costs ridiculous amounts of money.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
For
it's
gold.
not ridiculous for it to happen. I mean, especially if you're playing a campaign where you've been playing a character from level 1 to 15, for example. I'm sure you'll have quite a bit of riches and fame by then, and it's completely, within the power. And really, what the book says is, if they provide the materials, they get whatever type of magic item they want, whatever type of weapon. Like that's what they get. You just get to pick it.
Yeah, I had one of my campaigns where the DM actually took like when we went to a town, we were like, we've got all this stuff, we want to, sell some of it, and we ended up finding a blacksmith, and he, had us go there to get the armor, and then sent us to a magic shop, and he's like, you can spend X amount of money, give me these things, and I will make you this armor. And then so like we paid for it, but it would take 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks to make it. So you're pay for this armor and then you have to survive 2 weeks running around doing stuff on the countryside and then come back and the guy would have it for you. And I liked that aspect of it. It really made it feel like, it wasn't that instant gratification, but you felt more into the world because it wasn't just, oh, I killed this thing, looted this chest, hey, here's my stuff. It's, oh, I actually had to go get this stuff, farm it, give it to this guy, he made it, gives it back. Like it really gives that whole, brings you into the role play aspect of it. And I keep going back to that because I love the role play.
Yeah, I like that. I like that too, because ultimately, like you're saying, realistically, the way those are set up, medieval times, those sorts of things, like the guy's you're not gonna walk into an armor shop and he's just got like a plethora
Your
of armor on
exact
the wall.
set of armor that fits
Yeah.
you perfectly.
Yeah.
That perfect fit.
Like, oh yeah,
A
I have
gnome-
your measurements right here.
Yeah.
Oh,
A gnome walks
conveniently,
into
it's
a
already
human.
yeah, already
Yeah.
imbued with exactly what you're looking for. Like
That's right.
Now I know that some people say, magic items fit the person, it grows to your size, but like I like the aspect of, hey, here's a ring, but this ring's for a giant, not for you.
Right. That it can also lead to very funny circumstances, especially if you're not familiar with that rule. Vis-a-vis when you guys killed that snail in the jungle and you brought it to the guy and he was like, "Oh, I can totally make this into some sort of magic robe for you. Come back in like 2 months."
Yeah. It's like, well, we got to get to the temple now. We can't wait.
Still took us like 2 months anyways.
It did.
But in my 3.5 campaign, I was playing with the brother-in-law. Our barbarian wanted something specifically crafted for him. I think it was an axe or something. And it was one of those situations. It was legitimately going to take 2 months for the blacksmith to find the items needed, get the specialist. It wasn't a huge town, so he had to find a specialist to come in to imbue it with the magic he needed. So he was like, come back in 2 months. We got lucky that we ended in a multi-dimensional library that somehow, I can't remember exactly, because of the dimension we were in, time moved slower. We were actually in there for a full year without meaning to. And then when we came out, a year reading, role playing, reading for in-game year, coming out and finding out a year has passed, and he's like, shit, I need my axe. Hopefully the guy kept it.
Yeah, that would suck, right? 6 months goes by, a guy tells you 2 months, 6 months goes by, and you haven't been back. He's thinking, I'm giving another month, and I assume this dude's dead, right? Like, I'm selling this for profit. This thing's worth a hefty penny. Yeah, and that's one of those things that comes back to discretion of the DM. That would be really, really funny to be like, nah, man, I sold that. It's gone.
I'd be so angry. I was like, you didn't tell me I was going into a multi-dimensional portal where time was going to go by so slow. But yeah, I really like the mechanics. It's really what pulled me in. It's what I'm reading about. Like, one of the things that astounds me is that there's a little side thing. If you want to do a horror campaign, there are writings on doing a horror campaign and how you can do it. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a bravery tracker or something, and when it hits 0, it's essentially dying or something like that. I haven't read up because I don't really want to do a horror campaign. But one of the things I've really read into is like glory points, which are points that you get for factions, I believe. So if you wanted to, what's one of the factions in Cholt, Nick?
One of the factions in Chult?
Yeah, the one that a Kami King's character sided with.
That was like the Harpers?
Yes, the Harpers. So a Harpers faction, right? You can then have certain levels of the Harpers faction that your character can progress to and become more of a staple in that faction and maybe get certain benefits of it. Like maybe he has access to his own house in a city now because the faction runs this city and they have this. Or if you're doing a merchant's guild, you get discounts on any store that this merchant guilds own. Like just fun little things like that. There's so many mechanics underutilized in modules and just in D&D as a whole.
Yeah, and that it keeps coming around. I mean, like, you know, as I keep saying this, you'll start to realize how much work that Wizards of the Coast puts on the dungeon master. But I mean, it's up to the dungeon master to fill in any gaps and make things interesting. If it's not, you know.
Well, I mean, you are the world builder, so that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. You don't always have to do it. You know, I mean, the campaign we're playing right now, I'm really not adding anything. I'm just doing what the book says, and they're the hijinks that get that happen are things that I could not even anticipate. I can tell you that.
I like to. I'm the type of DM that presents the opportunity. I'm like, hey, here's this. Would you be interested in it in game? So I'm introducing factions. One of them is an actual traders guild. I was like, hey, so I told the player, I was like, hey, you've done a lot for us recently. You brought back this chest that we thought was lost to goblins. We don't have a whole lot to reward you with. If you're interested, I'd like to induct you as a member of this guild. You'll start at the base level where pretty much anytime someone asks, you're going to have to say yes if you want to progress. And so far they're interested. I need to write some stuff in the future for them to do. I don't want them to just level up that faction in one town. They're going to have to travel or meet other factions in the wild, but that's my plan. They seem interested in it, so I'm going to start using it.
And I totally respect all of that from the DM perspective, and I think it's something that's important if you are DMing to lay out maybe not all of the options, right? Because that is putting a lot on yourself, but maybe during your session 0 of like talking about characters and the campaign, you lay out like, okay, here's 5 or 6 different mechanics that we could implement into this campaign. I want to do no more than 3, but if you guys aren't interested in any, we don't have to do any. Say for instance, the attuning to magic items in a certain way, or the making of potions or those sorts of things, like dictating what you want to use or how to use it. I think that's definitely important, and like I said, provides a different level of role playing to the game.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't all have to always be in session 0. I didn't discover the faction thing till after we'd started, so I introduced it in game and then I explained it after the game, because there needs to be an after game conversation with your players too. It's like, how'd you feel about that session? What do you think could have been done better? What did you enjoy out of tonight? What was your favorite moment? And then you can also include, in case you didn't realize it, I introduced X mechanic. That's not something you have to follow. That's just something, if you want to seek out in the future, you're free to. Again, D&D is a give and take. I think a lot of people just forget that it's a made up game. You don't have to follow everything as written.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about role playing and everything, and I kind of wanted to ask everybody, what is your favorite character that you've either DM'd as or played as? Like your favorite character that you just fell in love with, that you didn't want to die, you wanted to play and keep going with them. Nick?
That's tough. Because I mean, like
Why I
the
started
obvious
with you.
the obvious answer would be Orvex, but I mean he's long lived because he is what he is, but he's also kind of a meme, silly character. So I mean, he's you know what I mean. I think my favorite character, probably that I've done, would probably have to be Artis Sember, the character from Tomb of Annihilation who wielded the Ring of Winter. I honestly, there was a couple of times where I was talking as him where I actually got a little misty eyed, because I don't know if I portrayed it very well in the game, but like I basically had the character say like, look, I'm on a quest to find my wife, and I've been on this quest for longer than you guys have been around, but I'm going to drop all of that and put my faith in you guys and do everything I can to make sure you guys complete this mission. Like he's just this NPC, but like, and I obviously I know his backstory more, and I'm more intimate with the character just because I had to do all this reading about him. But I mean, like, for me, he was a very emotionally grounded character. He had reasons for doing the things that he did, and they were good reasons, and he kind of sacrificed all of that to protect you guys.
Yeah.
And I was really, it was really important to me because I gave him one of the most epic ending scenes I've ever done, and I felt like it was a little bit self-indulgent when I did it, but I felt like it was important for me to display like how much he was putting into making sure you guys got inside this stupid tomb.
Yeah. Blake, what about you?
My favorite, just because one, he was memey. Two, it was my first serious character, was Lindell Firebreath, who was a dragonborn cleric. I was gonna start him off as super serious, and then for some reason I was just like, someone made a comment about why I keep hitting on the orc, and then I was like, I hit on everyone. So I just started hitting on everyone. And it turned into this thing where even in the middle of combat, I was asking if the bad guy didn't die, if they wanted to have a romp with me later on. That's also the only time I've ever had such successful called shots. Because if they denied me, I was like, okay, well my mace is gonna hit you in the balls now, and then I critted on every attack. I think I did 3 called shots of that variety and critted on every single one, and I'm never doing it again. So he was just a fun time.
Yeah.
Very good character, yeah.
Mine would have to be the high elf that I played during Horde of the Dragon Queen, Pernicious, that everybody loved to talk shit about and call it Precious.
Pernicus.
It's very
and I think
precious.
part of that, yeah,
that was the
I
campaign
think
that
part
I
of that
started with
was
you
I
guys.
just really enjoyed that character and like the background I had put around it. And actually, what we haven't started is the second portion of that campaign, which is what Rise of Tiamat, that we had briefly started. And
Yeah.
as most campaigns, we kind of have a break in between, when we're ending one and starting a next. And if we're carrying on that character, it's, finding a way to evolve that character kind of in the off season, right? While there's between these campaigns and you're maybe at a town. And I think the one thing I liked about that is I'd brought an idea to Nick about wanting to evolve my character into a style that didn't really exist in D&D. It was more of like a homebrew style of a red mage. So, we've talked about in our MMO episode, Final Fantasy, and, some of the classes and stuff we played. Red mage was always one of my favorites. And so I brought him the information of what it would look like to take this red mage from, level 1 to level 20, the kind of abilities that you would get, spells that you're able to cast to ensure that it was going to be balanced, for the campaign. And he was like, yeah, that sounds great. It looks great. So I think that's why I fell in love with that too. I was able to take that character and evolve it into like what I really wanted to play and see in a character. And it allowed you to do different things that weren't standard across, a particular class. And yeah, that became one of my favorite characters to play.
I was gonna say my favorite character that I've ever played wasn't in any of the campaigns that I've played with you guys. It was a barbarian who multi-classed into bard. He was a barbarian, and he basically just ran around, and his name was Leslie Alpenswift. And anybody that called him Leslie, he got very angry and would rage and try to fight you. And it was very fun to play RP wise. But in the campaign, we were being like, it was kind of like a post-apocalyptic thing. There was enemies all over the place. And my instrument of choice for this guy was the bagpipes. And so I would wake up every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning and play these bagpipes super loud. And it would just, for like miles around the base, would bring all these different enemies at us. And every morning we'd have to fight these enemies. And it was just a thing that my character did every single time. We ended up going up against the four horsemen of the world we were in. And I failed the will saves and put the rings on. So he ended up becoming evil, and which made it even better because he had a sword that craved blood. It was just, he was a lot of fun to play, mainly because it was a meme to play. And it's one of the characters that I wish didn't die, but at the same time, he didn't fit the party anymore and kind of was taking the party one way and everybody else was trying to go the other way. So we kind of just killed him off. But he's one that I wish I still had. But with you guys, it was definitely Kip.
Kip was a great character.
Kip was an awesome character. Those of you that don't know, Kip was a Kenku bard that could not talk, but would write messages to everybody.
And would occasionally like repeat words that had been said within the past, 20 minutes of conversation.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was upset that Zygon died, so I made a new character that I could just sulk.
And he sulked. He did.
So I got a couple of lightning round questions we can answer that are real quick that I'm curious about, and it'll be kind of fun.
Is this going to be like your defend your game and we take it the complete wrong way?
Nope, I made it way simpler this time. Way simpler. Let's just go. Brendan, Stephen, Blake. Favorite class to play in Dungeons and Dragons?
Barbarian.
Ghost. Oh, I don't know. Cleric.
I'll do Druid. Favorite race to play?
Ooh,
and why? Favorite race and why?
I'm just gonna go with a basic human, just because I like the variant of it that you can go.
Mine would be either elf or high elf. I think that just comes from like watching fantasy shows and playing different games and feeling like, man, elves are just so like agile and classy and noble. And I don't know, as a kid being like, man, I wish I was an elf. That's probably what it really comes from. As a child being like, man, I wish I was an elf. I wish I had pointy ears. Like not elf in like the Christmas sense of the word, but like, more of the fantasy side of being an elf.
Living forever. Got it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll just go with gnome and an elf variant.
Why?
Gosh. Shit.
Don't worry, man. There's no pressure on this question. Nobody's living or dying.
Well,
I didn't think this far through.
I haven't played enough of the races to feel like I can give a good reason, but I really enjoy gnome because they get a luck feat where they can just randomly decide. I think lucky allows them to re-roll a dice, and then elves.
Halfling that gets the lucky.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Gnome gets talk with small beast, which is also really fun.
I was gonna say that's why I like halfling is because the lucky feet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's my bad. See, not enough races. Gnomes you can just have some fun with. Playing a gnome wizard has been very fun. In another campaign I've taken part of, but so that's just been very fun. And then elves, because growing up watching Lord of the Rings, I'm like, oh shit, elves are tight, and just wishing they were real or something. And
Yeah.
there's an actual language around elves,
Mhm.
so it makes it a little bit more real.
Yeah, mine would definitely have to be, so class would be druid because I love druids. And the race would 100% be turtles. I love turtles.
Ooh.
I think they're awesome. The only thing that I dislike about turtles in D&D is that their lifespan is not very long, like 50, 60 years. The lore in D&D is because they're so fast that basically increases their metabolism, so their body burns through a little faster than normal turtles. Because I mean, like when you're looking at a turtle compared to a turtle, they're basically the Flash. Like they can move so fast compared to normal turtles. So because they move so much faster, it's more wear and tear on their body basically, and that's why they have shorter lifespans. So I'm like, that's fine. That's a very fun anecdotal story, I guess. But in my games, turtles can live to be like 600 years old. So
Which makes sense. More sense than what actual rules are.
yeah, I just love the idea of a giant turtle person, and I think it comes from my love of Final Fantasy 11. One of the enemies in that game was a beastman tribe called Quadivs, and they were basically turtle people, and that's essentially what turtles are. And I just loved their character designs and their like the atmosphere of the lands that you fought them in. They were always swampy and marshy and foggy, and I really like that aesthetic. So I mean, that's why. One more question: what is your favorite Dungeons and Dragons monster you've ever fought?
Ooh. Well.
Are you including homebrew?
Sure.
Okay.
For me, I love fighting beholders. They're so
I was gonna say
random,
that's
and you don't know what's going to happen, and they're so creepy.
yeah. I was debating between Beholder and I couldn't think of the name of the other one, but Beholder's probably mine too, just because I've had a lot of really fun encounters with Beholders. Like I've fought a Rust Beholder where your armor's gone,
Hmm.
and yeah, I would definitely say Beholder just because you can literally think like, oh, I'm behind it, and then all of a sudden it's like, pew, beam, and you're like, no, I can do no freaking magic. This sucks.
Mine would probably have to be a dragon, just for I don't know, I guess the most basic reason, really. You go back to any sort of fantasy style thing, the ultimate end goal is to defeat the giant dragon. And I think I love fighting dragons because anytime I think I'm like, oh yeah, we're high level, we've got this, we're gonna do well in this fight. And like 2 seconds in, we're like, oh my God, this was a terrible idea. Why did we do this? The dragon hits like 6 times. It's got legendary actions. You're like, oh, I'm going to use this
Yeah.
attack. And the DM's like, nope, hold on. Legendary action. That's not going to happen this turn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love as a DM, you guys are like, I use this, and I just say he passes. I don't even
Oh,
roll.
you
He
mean
passes.
are you referring to Blake's Sacred Flame?
Those are legitimate rolls. I'll take that. I'll take that to the grave.
Fake news.
All right.
Uh,
Well, since we're coming up on time, so one more thing to throw out there, mostly just because I can bring up something I wanted to talk about. What if you guys had to pick a different tabletop game in a different world in a different setting? Which one would it be? And this can either exist or not exist. Now, for me, it's probably going to be if I had to pick a different one, it would be the Mistborn campaign book that I just got, and it's essentially a D&D style game within the world of Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn. If you haven't heard of that, it's a book series where they have a very unique magic system and it's very exciting. But another one that just came out recently is the Avatar: The Last Airbender tabletop role playing game, which I'm also very interested to try out.
Yeah, I wish I
Um,
would have got in on the Kickstarter.
yeah. So I mean, sci-fi, fantasy. What else would you guys choose?
I mean, now that you said that, all I have in my head is I would go with another Sanderson, but I would do the Stormlight Archives
Mm.
just because I love those books. I got really like I've never been a big reader. And just growing up, I always tried to get into like the Harry Potter books and all the different, Lord of the Rings. Like I read Lord of the Rings, I loved them, but it was one of those that I read them once and that was it. Like I never went on to read other books. And when I started to read the Stormlight Archive books, it pushed me to want to read more. And if I could play like a role playing game, it would be in that world because I like the way the magic works. I like the way it's suits of armor so much as not you more relied on that, and I don't know, just the way everything works in that world just interests me. Like the magic's like this old dead thing that's kind of like taboo, and
Yeah,
you know
I've only read the first one of those, but I would agree with that. I love the
mhm.
shard plate, and that would all just be
Yeah,
really cool, unique stuff. Like having to get it
yeah,
repaired, on your
hmm,
journeys and stuff. That would be a lot of fun.
yeah.
I think mine would be if it wasn't related to like a like directly descendant of like Final Fantasy or World of Warcraft, like in a tabletop version. Not, if I didn't go that direction, I would probably say it would be like based off the Aragon books because I'm not a big reader either, but I really enjoyed how like he stumbles across this egg. He has this egg and it hatches and he finds out that, he can speak to it. And then he's starting to have to learn magic and you actually have to learn the words which were in Elvish, and travel through towns to different areas, and you come across to like an elven community or this forest that's been hidden that people didn't know about, and ultimately by you having this dragon and being a dragon rider, you're destined for something more. That sort of style of like a D&D thing would be something I think would be really fun to play just because there's so much story context to it, and you're at the same time you can still kind of build your own character and your own kind of path through that.
Yeah, that's a good one too. And I think we can all agree that the one D&D style book that they need to come out with so we can play would be Reign of Fire, so that we can all be Hell's Angels and jump out of helicopters and try to jump on dragons' backs.
That would be fun.
Yes, please.
I didn't get to answer the favorite monster you fought question, but recently I had
Oh,
to
I'm
fight a
sorry.
gnome. No, you're fine.
Hey, what's your favorite monster in Dungeons and Dragons?
Let me answer. So recently
Did you
been
get to
in
answer the monster question?
Did I
I've
ask
been
him
in
the
a
D&D
campaign.
monster question?
Recently I've been in a campaign that's very Feywild focused. And so we had to fight a kind of homebrewed gnome where these gnomes are embedded with razors throughout their skin. They're kind of masochists and fans of pain. It makes fighting them terrifying. Even though I'm a wizard and fight at a distance, the thought of them running up on me and just grappling me in a bear hug is terrifying.
Good Lord.
And
Is there a lament configuration nearby? Some sort of evil box that opens a gateway for some Cenobites to come through and provide
there
pleasure
probably
and
is.
pain?
There
Good
probably is,
grief.
honestly.
That sounds terrifying.
And then you've all given great answers that I would have given answers to myself. I think if I wanted to root it into a game that already exists, I would give Pathfinder a try. And then if a game that could exist, I don't know if it does exist. I actually think it does, but Lord of the Rings TTRPG, I'd like to give that just because I'm a huge fan of Lord of the Rings as well.
Awesome.
So Nick, do you have a good, not great? It could be anything about D&D. What do you got?
I can immediately think of one specific to Dungeons and Dragons. So, one of the very first large scale campaigns that I ever ran was Horde of the Dragon Queen, which is a sister campaign to its sequel, and the sequel is called Rise of Tiamat. Now, I did not complete Rise of Tiamat as a dungeon master, but I did read through the entire game, and I can tell you right now, it is good, but not great. I think Horde of the Dragon Queen is actually pretty great. But when you compare Rise of Tiamat to that, there's too much politics. There's too much back and forth between NPCs and bickering, and it takes so long to get to the meat and potatoes. It just falls a bit short in the entertainment category for me. So I think because of the politics and because of how long it takes for everything to get moving, and all of the small NPCs that you have to deal with along the way that may or may not be a larger part of the story later on, just to get to the big awesome fight that is the Tiamat fight at the end. All of these factors make it a good campaign, but not a great one. Well, thanks for tuning in to part 2 of our Dungeons and Dragons special. Since we saw a physician last week, we're now off to the pharmacy to go buy our gluteal orthotic. So check us out next time, and we'll see you later.
You're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go Mac, right? Like